Okay, hello and welcome everyone to Hunting for Silver Linings. Today is Tuesday, January 12th, 2021, here in the Great Lakes region of the US. I am the chapter director for Startup Grind Grand Rapids. And my colleague here, Yorgo, is joining us for the Hunting for Silver Linings program. And we have a very special guest today, Alex from Startup Grind, Barcelona. Hello, how are you, sir?
Hello, and good afternoon from Barcelona, from all the way from the other side of the pond.
That's right. Um, really grateful for the generosity of your time, and you're an incredibly active member of the community. So I'm excited to learn from your background and history also, because I'm a startup grind baby. I've only been doing this for about a year. So maybe you could start us off with introduction on your personal background, and then end up on like how you found and got plugged into startup grind.
Yeah, I'm a software developer. I started coding at age 12, something like that. Very rapidly, I just became a programmer, started coding on my own. I studied computer science in the university, lived 3 years abroad in Germany, and then went back to Barcelona, where I built a career in consulting, mostly old school consulting, which is what eventually turned me off in this profession because the kind of bad practices in the sector, like opacity in the pricing, like a project, never-ending projects, so on and so forth. That's something that I didn't like. I worked for big consultancies, big international consultancies. Eventually, 7 years ago, more or less around these dates, I decided to create my own venture, which is March-based. This is a company over here. It's a development consultancy. We got an all remote team of 20 people scattered around Spain, Portugal, and the UK. And 7 years ago as well, when I was embarking on my first entrepreneurial venture, I went to the US. I went to San Francisco to kind of like soak up and absorb as much knowledge as possible and know-how from startups, innovation, disruption, whatever, because that's the cradle of entrepreneurship, right? I moved there for 3 months in the tourist visa. And that's where I got to know Sarah Bryan. A friend from our community forwarded me an email and said, dude, you got to go to this event. I was last year in the first global conference. This is a really great event. And lo and behold, it was a couple of weeks away. And I said, okay, I'm gonna join it. But Jesus Christ, it was like the 500 quid or something like that. It was really expensive. And I was broke and I was paying insanely, absurdly overpriced rent in San Francisco. So I got a discount just because I was applying to be a chapter director at the same time. I'd been scanning the website, and long story short, prior to that, we had been organizing as a company, an event, a similar event in Barcelona twice a month for entrepreneurs, where I interviewed somebody. And so I told the guys, look, guys, I'm already doing this in Barcelona, and they felt like 50 people ready per event, something like that. It's a growing community, nothing professional. So if we join forces, you give me the brand, and it could be a great idea to team up, right? I've always been the kind of person that teams up and believes in cooperation rather than just everybody fighting their own wars. And so Startup Grind Barcelona was born barely a month after my company in early 2014.
And you grew the Barcelona chapter into more than just a single chapter, right? So like, can you tell us a little bit about the presence that you've the vision you had for that community?
Yeah, so Barcelona is a great ecosystem. I would argue it's the biggest ecosystem in Spain. At the beginning, of, like 3 years ago, no, more like 5 years ago, at Startup Grind, there was another role that was the regional director, right? As the community was growing, because when I joined, I think we are about 70 chapters, and in Europe, it must have been a dozen. David here from Zurich, he will know it better, right? I think it was like the first one in Europe, something like that. Now, I think there was 10 chapters, 12 maybe when I joined in Europe. And so as the community kind of like went boom, Starbrand decided to devise these kind of roles of the regional director, which I became regional director for Southwestern Europe for 2 3 years. The amount of time that we sort of volunteered for that prior to the reorganization of Starbrand, then it became an internal role done by the Starbrand full-time members because it just went too big. But yeah, then I remember 2 3 years ago, we decided to open another chapter in a small country nearby Barcelona. It's called Andorra. Small country, 70,000 people. I mean, fucking Google has got more people than that country, but it's amazing. It's a nascent ecosystem, and very strong on blockchain, very strong on on cryptos and stuff, just because it's got its own regulations and a sovereign country, and they can do whatever they want and in a faster pace than perhaps big countries. They're not part of the EU, so things like that, right? That obviously helps. We didn't find much of a community there. The community is very blockchain focused and everything, not so much on entrepreneurship. There are now startups from there, like most startups and coming from there, just because Barcelona is barely 2 hours away by car. They just come to Barcelona, right? Or they just go to London or whatever, like they just don't stay there. So that chapter didn't quite work. We did a few events over there. And right now I'm focused more on not only helping other chapters inside the city, because Startup Grind has got Startup Grind X and Startup Grind EU. So X being for smaller cities surrounding big cities or capitals. We are just opening one in Mataró, which is a city barely 30 minutes away north from Barcelona. I'm speaking there next week as the first guest. So I'm really excited. My mom used to live there for a while, so that's why I'm happy to be speaking in Mataró. And then universities, we opened a couple of chapters in the universities in Barcelona, and we are also supporting them from our, humble contribution of the Startup Grind Barcelona team.
Sure, that's a lot. That's a lot of growth, and it's a lot of trial and error. Now, I'm going to go on to some of the ecosystem questions here. You just brought up the SGU, so the partnerships that we have when you grow chapters inside universities. Can you tell us a little bit about how, like, what the talent is like in your region? Is it pretty robust? Is there no shortage of talent? Do universities skill people up enough when they graduate? Are they ready for entrepreneurism?
That's a really good question, because Barcelona is mostly well known as a party city, right? A lot of people just know the sun, the beach, the paella, and everything else, but they don't know that it's got a vibrant ecosystem for startups. Right now, we're riding the second wave of startups. The biggest, I would say, the biggest Spanish startups from the late 90s, the ones that shaped the ecosystem nowadays, they went big right before the dot-com bubble burst. So these people in turn who made their IPOs, their exits, are now either serial entrepreneurs, but they are angel investors, right? Or they have created their VC funds. So right now they're riding the second wave. And what's interesting about the second wave is, as opposed to the first wave, where all the businesses that were created there, or startups that were created in that time, those were 100% Spanish-speaking companies, 100% focused on Spain or the Latin American market, right? I'm talking about InfoJobs, I'm talking about eDreams, who later became like more global, talking about Softonic, talking about, some companies here and there. But these people, either they have invested, they have co-founded the companies of the second wave with people from abroad, like some expats that have been coming to the city just because they studied here, they work here, they loved it. They've seen that not only you can have fun in Barcelona and get wasted every single night if you want, but it's also a great city to do business in, maybe to work in, maybe not so much to do business in. I'm pretty skeptical about that, but it's really great to work in, right? Because it's got a real healthy life balance, and then it's cheap, and it's very international, so therefore it's very easy to just mingle with tourists and expats all the time. So these second wave of startups are global from day one, and a lot of companies you might be using nowadays. I mean, a great example, perhaps our most well-known example outside of our borders, is Typeform. It's a truly global company. Most people think it's from the US and California, but they are from Barcelona, right? And everybody uses freaking Typeform. And that's the kind of company that you wouldn't tell that it's from Barcelona, just because it lives and breathes as a Californian company, perhaps, right? Because it's got the inspiration, early hires from California. It's inspiration from like Stripe and Square and all our Twitter, Pocket, whatever, all these companies that just sprung in San Francisco 10 years ago, something like that. And so this second wave is really damn interesting. So with regards to your question in terms of talent, what I wanted to say here is that, like, nowadays people just come to study, but they stay because they know they can work here. Prior to the boom of the ecosystem 10 years ago, perhaps people came, they had the time of their life here in Barcelona. They just partied like there was no tomorrow, and then it's like, yeah, fun times, I'm going back to my country because I need a job, right? But now they can stay.
Now, you mentioned the importing of talent and how easy that is, and it has been really prevalent in this second wave. I'm familiar with some of the programs that that Spain has as far as entrepreneurship and the ability to get like easy visas and residency and some like public support. Is that popular for people to take advantage of, or is?
Yeah, I mean, in comparison with the US, every country is easy to get into, right? So just find a job. Yeah, I would say like if you really want to come to Spain, it's pretty easy. I mean, in terms of visa, provided you got certain qualifications, so on, and but it's more like, yeah, you got some relatives here. I'm not the right person to talk about this, but I know that if you got relatives here, your family is from here, like, yeah, you had a grandparent from Spain, something like that, it's very easy to claim citizenship or nationality, and then just be able to come over. Same with jobs, right? Provided you've got at least a university degree, it's very easy to get a visa, a working visa. Prior to that, prior to working, for studying, it's really easy. There's a pan-European program that's called Erasmus, right? That's basically spending 6 to 12 months abroad. That's why I went to Germany in 2008, and it's sort of like a student program, whereby exchange program for students. So if you are enrolled in a university, then you can get a special permission to be in the country. If you are enrolled in a language course, you also get like a visa, so things like that. It's pretty easy. And then for American students who might be listening to this, might be relevant for them, there's a few companies in Barcelona. One of them comes to mind because we collaborate with them pretty often. It's called Barcelona SAE, Barcelona Study Abroad Experience, that they are able to place American interns and startups in Barcelona. So definitely check them out. Huge shout out to them because they're great people and they always bring their amazing students to our events. And so I know there's 3 or 4 of them. So just check them out. It's pretty easy to come to Barcelona to look for a job or for working experience.
Right. I have family in Austria, and I was always very jealous about the Erasmus program. Being from the U.S., where we have to pay an arm and a leg just to get a mediocre education. But so yeah, it's nice that that people can plug into programs like that. So. Now, let's say I am I'm a young resident. I've been in university. I have an idea for a startup. Is it fairly easy then? Since it is a robust ecosystem, I can find like a co-founder. I can find my team as an early startup pretty easily.
It is easy to find people. Well, not nowadays because of the pandemic, right? We're in a sort of a lockdown. I mean, you can walk out, but there are no meetings are not allowed unless it's like close friends and families. So there are no business meetings right now as we speak. Prior to that, yeah, there were tons of events like Startup in Barcelona. We have sort of become the startup event, the startup meetup for entrepreneurs in Barcelona. Our event is always maxed out at 150 people. And it's a paid event, as you know, at Startup Grind, it's a paid event. So it's a good event to find somebody to co-found a company with, to find investors even, to find designers, freelancers, contractors, or any sort of partnerships, because we got even like our partners and sponsors in Barcelona. There might be, it's a law firm, we got a co-working spaces, we got digital agencies, whatever, right? So it's always a good way to find people. Finding co-founders, that's a tricky question. That's something that I see a lot, and I'd like to give this unsolicited advice. Like if you're out there going to events to find a co-founder, chances are that you're doing something wrong. I think that most early hires should come by word of mouth within your trusted network, right? That goes without saying. You should have network. Oh, you should work in that, or just reach out to them. But like going to events, normally I don't think the quality of the people you're gonna find there are the best ones to found a company with. Might sound a little bit arrogant. I don't want to come out like that, but I think like the best people are not really looking for new adventures, right?
Sure.
So they are staying at home. They're just working on their things because they got too many requests, they got too many proposals, and if you befriend them and if you talk to them for long enough and then you end up convincing them, seducing them into your new idea or adventure, you'll find it. But just going to events, hoping to find a co-founder, that's something that I get a lot, and especially because I run a software development company, like 10 to 15 people a week ask me for a CTO. It's like, this is not how you go about it. But I guess you got to try, right? You got to try. Like how we say here, like we say, you already have got the no, then you got to look for the yes, right? So
now, so if I've got my idea, just bopping around to events and bars is not maybe the best way to bump into some talent. Are there sector specific like innovation hubs? Is there like university and tech transfer opportunities? Are there corporations that might have like innovation centers that I might be able to go to?
yeah, I would argue that maybe the ecosystem is not as solid as perhaps, it's not tier one, saying like Silicon Valley, Tel Aviv, London, maybe Berlin, arguably Berlin too, things like that. But it's great. And the good thing about Barcelona right now, or prior to the pandemic, is like there was the opportunity of pioneering in certain areas, right? In the last 5 years, we've seen all of these things you've mentioned. They've popped up in the last 5 years. I mean, of course, there were universities, but they were not doing tech transfer. Of course, there were corporates. They were not doing corporate venturing. Of course, there were accelerators, but they were not verticals, right? They were just like generic accelerators, right? With, I would say, less value than the ones that are already like specialized. And you want to work in the automotive industry, you go to Ford because they got a great program, right? And now here, like we've got the equivalent of sort of Ford, we got SEAT in Barcelona, right? And they do a lot of stuff. They have the co-working, they got the corporate venturing branch, they got like the accelerator, the incubator for companies, and they got a VC, a corporate VC firm as well. So, but prior to that, 5 years ago, nothing. And right now it's not, I wouldn't say it's early stages, it's pretty solid already, but it's still learning, right? So if you're still in time to like make an impact here. That's why I think we're pretty successful at Startup in Barcelona, because we're the first startup event in English, and one of the very first events that, first of all, we charged, and the second, we met regularly, no matter what, every month, at least once. And other events didn't have this regularity, right? So if you do things right and you're consistent, you can create a lot of impact in Barcelona still, because it's not as consolidated so that there's these tech elites that they control everything. Yeah, of course, there might be, every ecosystem has got their own mafia, and we do have one or two here, but there's still like the cake is big enough.
That's awesome. That it raises a bunch of different questions. But you first started. You mentioned the verticals that usually come out of the growth of an ecosystem. Can you speak to us about some of the more popular, or maybe even some of the upcoming opportunities as far as sectors in the region?
Sure. Barcelona has always been very good at certain things outside, like prior to tech, right? So Barcelona is well known for design and architecture, right? And tourism, because basically we live off tourism and nothing else. But I think we're not capitalizing in that, right? We are a design hub, but we haven't brought that into tech. We are an architectural reference in the world. We haven't brought that into tech. We are really good at, what else have I mentioned? The design, tourism. We're not doing anything with travel, right? So why? Like there's travel tech companies. There are a couple. There's Travel Perk and 2 or 3 more in Barcelona, but that's it, right? We're not capitalizing on things that we're actually really good at, right? But other things we are not really great at, we're capitalizing heavily. Like we're fucking awful at fintech, but we've got dozens of fintech companies that they go and incorporate in London. They operate in the US, but they're headquartered in Barcelona just because it's cheaper, right? But that's not how you go about things, right? So because probably we don't have the best people at, studying economics or finance or whatever, right? I think that, and that's my opinion, right? If we could capitalize on architecture and sort of work more on real estate, like prop tech, for instance, right? That's something that's sort of up and coming, but never kind of like materializes over here, or travel tech, or something related to design. You want to have the best designers, like companies. Why don't we have companies like Sketch, Envision, Figma, Adobe, or something like that? If we got the best designers in Barcelona, right? Or fashion tech, like we're also pretty well known, second perhaps to Milan in Europe for fashion. And like we're not doing anything with it, right? So that's why I'm kind of disappointed with the verticals in Barcelona. I think we're capitalizing on certain, like, the wrong things. One thing that's actually pretty interesting, I think that we are spearheading here a little bit, or leading, just to avoid just speaking badly of my own ecosystem, but it's like mobility and last mile deliveries, right? Barcelona is super well architectured. As a city, is one of the, pioneered the grid-like design pioneered by Ildefons Cerdà in the 1800s. And that's proving to be really useful nowadays for companies like Amazon, or the equivalents of Postmates in the US, which is kind of like Glovo over here, are like the food delivery companies, because they can optimize their routes a little bit better. And delivery companies, storage companies, last mile, they are doing a really good job, and like coming up with discoveries that then they are implementing in the other cities.
Thank you for that summary. Now, when we
Can I just interject? I have one question before you change the topic for a second. Alex, I mean, this is really powerful in terms of both what is possible and what is not possible. Having been to Barcelona many times, I have to admit that the architecture is intriguing. The fashion component is outstanding. The food is beyond belief. And the beaches are second to none. I mean, a beautiful ecosystem.
Second to Greece, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful ecosystem. And the question here is this. First of all, how can you convince, quote unquote, the entrepreneurs to look around them and build on the foundations of what others have built? What we have discovered is entrepreneurs think like champions. In other words, they look at the world in a different way, and they find a solution based on the way they look at existing problems. But they define the problems in a slightly different way than most human beings do. And the same thing applies to champions. The champions get out of bed every morning and say, I'm going to beat myself. They don't say, I'm going to beat XYZ, right? They get inspiration from competition, they get inspiration from previous generations, and so on and so forth. But they look very deeply inside. Do you see that happening in your ecosystem?
Sure. Most of these startups that I'm seeing, or, well, I haven't mentioned it in the beginning, I'm also an angel investor, and I'm investing in B2B SaaS companies, right? And whereas the first wave and even the second wave of startups in Barcelona have always been traditional B2C, a lot of e-commerce and a lot of B2C companies, right now we're seeing a small but steady rise of B2B companies. Why? Because the founders, or the previous founders of all these previously mentioned companies and investors, are creating the companies that are solving the problems to the companies that they previously had founded or funded, right? So I'm seeing more and more B2B. I'm seeing more and more SaaS, which is good. And that they take the advantage, or they leverage the existing networks of their previous companies, all the infrastructure, the hires. They just go to create a new company, and 10 to 15 people they can get like this, like real fast, because like, hey, dude, I'm creating this new company. You want to come work for me? Like I'll double your salary, whatever. I got investment. Like it's very easy for them to raise money. It's very easy to make great hires. So in turn, I think this sort of cumulative and reinforcing model, it will create better and stronger startups. So they are building on the foundations of not only previous generations of people, but their own companies, right? And we've got a really good example, a really funny example here. You guys can relate to that because one of the founders of Download.com, right, that was acquired by CNET in the US, right? He's now spearheading Softonic, which is a software company, a software marketplace from Barcelona, but he's competing against his previous company because he competes head-on with Download.com, right? And he's like, my dream every day is to crash my former company. Like, I just want to beat them. I just want to like take them out of the market. And that's the sort of companies that we're seeing nowadays, right? And that's a very extreme example, but I felt like a lot of people can remember the good old days when we used to download Messenger, ICQ, things like that from Download.com, right? So
sure. And you're answering, of course, my second question, the going beyond the national boundaries. In other words, your own company, you mentioned at the beginning that Marspace has a team of developers in London, in Barcelona. So you're essentially expanding your territory. But from what you just described with download.com, many of the entrepreneurs are finding exits through international acquisitions or mergers. Is that something that you expect to grow going forward? And by the way, it is really impressive to see that you're able to charge for attendance, for membership into Startup Grind Barcelona. I think to me that is very interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting because for context, and perhaps American listeners will not know this, but so in this small region, northeast of Spain, that's called Catalonia, we're really well known for being cheap, right? And so we don't want to pay for stuff. So, but I'm Catalan myself, so I knew that I don't want to have a lot of people in my event. I just want to have the right people, right? And if they don't want to pay, then perhaps they're not that interested. I don't want to feel my event. Of course, at the beginning we had a few friends coming over and just helping out just to get to the event for free and whatever, and volunteering. But very soon we just said like, no, that's sort of not the kind of people we want to have. We want to have like a really nurtured and sophisticated community coming to the event, because that will attract internal people, right? So charging was hard at the beginning, but it worked. It worked from the event number 5, 6, 7. We started bringing like really great names, and then from there it was just snowballing into everything else, and kind of like destroying every obstacle in the way, right? So that was one thing. You said the other thing was M&A, right? Growing through M&A, expanding through M&A. I'm not an expert in economics, but I think like right now we might be headed. I think we're definitely headed into a recession, right? And in times like this, where usually it happens, I've been asking a lot of experts, because that's the first crisis I lived as a business owner. The previous one, 2008, I lived as an employee, right? So this one's the first one as a business owner. And everybody told me like, it's a great moment for consolidation, right? If your business is not doing well, just sell, because it's a great moment. Like a lot of companies will want to buy at discount. A lot of companies, they want to buy cheap developers, they want to buy patents, they want to buy technology, they want to buy market share, whatever. So here's an advice for other companies who might be struggling, or they just want to quit and move on to something else, right? That's not our case, likely, but I think that we'll be seeing a lot of this. As a matter of fact, like today I got the news that one of the companies I had invested in 3 years ago is merging with a bigger one, which is great news, I guess, for exit as an investor. Obviously, it's not a great exit, but provided I can get shares of the acquiring company, then just I'm happy with that. But that's what we're going to see in the next few years. I don't know over there. Perhaps the U.S. is better at taking care of the economy. Maybe not now, not lately, but usually you guys have been great at that. But like Spain's fine. Like usually if we're so entrepreneurial, it's because our leaders, our politicians, they don't know what they're doing. So we have to figure out on our own. So
I think I would like to stay on this point for a second, Corey and Alex, because you are the first of our regional directors who is talking about a slowdown. You are talking about a recession. And of course, there's a lot of obfuscation, a lot of, so to speak, talking your book on both the political front, but also the economic front. And I'm wondering, what makes you think we're heading into a slowdown, and what kind of a slowdown would that be?
The main reason, but at least, first of all, I think it's going to be European one. I mean, worldwide, we have seen the effects of the pandemic, right? People dying, people losing their jobs, economy is slowing down, no business travel. Then again, I'm not an expert on finance or economics, and like I barely know the basics, right?
Yeah, but you provide services to companies. You're
correct.
providing, yeah. So
yeah, but I live that I like one thing I beg to differ here is like I live inside a tech bubble, right? And we live inside a tech bubble, and we don't know what's going on. But at least Spain is a country where an entrepreneur usually has historically been the person owning a bar or a small shop. Like never had digital businesses, like digital business. We didn't even use the word startup into like 2014, 2013, something like that. We had never heard of that word. we had internet businesses or digital businesses, right? And those were crazy. They had like super opaque fame, and like they were dodgy, and you wouldn't want to work for them because obviously you got the banks and the corporations and the insurance companies. Those guys are legit. You should go to work for them after your career, and that's what you're told. But if you're, I don't know, if you're lucky or unlucky, sometimes your family has got a business and you carry on with that business because it's always been like that. So there's not a lot of social mobility, which is something I'm pretty passionate about, so to speak. So if your family has had always like working class occupations or roles or jobs, chances are you will only get working class jobs, right? So there's not a lot of change. There's no space of change. And what's happening here as a country that traditionally has lived off tourism in, I don't know a percentage. I don't want to say an arbitrary number, but everybody works off, hotels, travel, food, restaurants, whatever, right? So right now, all of them are without jobs. All of them are without jobs. I don't know. I just read today that we had 40% unemployment rate, youth unemployment rate in Spain, right? Topping the charts. And the second country in the list was 26. So there's an abyss between, 40 and 26, right? So I know a lot of my friends are without jobs. Like there's like scrapping things here and there, like freelancers just working for unpaid jobs or pro bono volunteering, just because there's nothing else to do. Like nobody's hiring. The regulations are pretty hard, and most companies are scared shitless. And they have I think the right word is furlough people, right? So they cannot sack them, but it's a temporary thing. But while they are like this, they kind of look for another job. And chances are most of these people, they wouldn't get a job in normal conditions. So it's not easy for them because they're like over 50 or they're not super qualified, right? And they've always been in this company for like, 25 years, something like that. Right now they're in this situation. And if this doesn't go back to normal, they're not going to work again, right? This will create a lot of unrest. And definitely I'm seeing that the situation is not going back to normal anytime soon for our country. I don't know the rest, but tourism is huge here, and that's one of the main pains or my complaints about the leadership of this country is we're still in 2021. We still haven't figured out how to diversify and not have all the eggs in the same basket, right? And leave off tourism, it was going to backfire someday, and it had just happened.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to raise these observations. I also think that the European Union is becoming more and more ossified. There's no flexibility, and they're sticking to processes and procedures that they were applicable in the late 80s and early 90s, but no longer applicable to the 21st century.
I absolutely agree with that. I think it's, it's just a matter of politics. I don't know how deep you want to go into that, but I could talk about hours. I could talk about for hours.
Thank you for your observations, Corey.
Yeah.
Well, we often talk about the topic of mindset, especially in regions like your own. Like Spain is not a young country, right? Yeah. You already mentioned how you have generations of mindset, like weighting the entire country down, right? And also maybe the opportunities of some youth. But then on the other hand, you also mentioned that you have a very active community. That's in the part of your startup grind chapter, not just your chapter, but in the community as a whole. Startup is a new word. Now that we're at this generational shift, and especially forcing a movement because of this crisis, what is your outlook? I mean, is it optimistic? I mean, we can talk about the problems, but I mean, is it around the corner?
I'm not very optimistic. I always like to say, I think there's a ton of false optimism in the startup industry, just because a lot of people leave off that, right? Sort of like the same people who just leech off entrepreneurs by being coach or advisor in companies here and there. I think that, there's a lot of life coaches or like this fake optimism here and there. I like to bring a little bit of dark, because if everything was light, we'll be just too blind to carry on, right? And sorry to bring people down. I don't think this is improving anytime soon. Luckily, we've got the vaccinations, but we are not, as people, or as humans, we're not prepared to sort of understand these kind of situations right now, because a lot of people call it a black swan. That's what we're happening here, like an unprecedented moment changing the course of history with major economic shifts and societal shifts. Yeah, that's what we're seeing here. We don't know when that's going to end. And one of the major mindset changes that I've had to adapt this year as a control freak is to kind of let go of any sort of control or control sensation, right? Because we're not in control. We don't know. Our government told us like, yeah, this will be a matter of 2 weeks, lockdown for 2 weeks. Like, all right, so this is the kind of government that we've got over here, right? So, and we're 1 month away, 1 month and 2 weeks away from the moment where we started a lockdown, the harsh lockdown. We're locked down for 2 months and a half without leaving our homes in Barcelona, right? And luckily we haven't gone back to that, but like right now restaurants are only open for like a couple hours a day. Most shops are closed, gyms are closed, schools are closing this week. Like you cannot leave your city, you cannot travel around. So it's pretty hard. Like it's pretty hard. And I think that all of this effect of 1 year, like forget about the economics of it. Like we know that this is going to be a shit show for many, many years, right? Because it has happened in the past. But I'm much more worried about the people, the mental sanity of people, like what we've lost here, like all the we've suffered it in the company. Like every employee, every member of our company has had some kind of problem this year, like ranging from depression to anxiety to problems with their wives to like problems with their children, not being able to see their grandparents, and or like it's difficult. So I think that we are learning how to cope with loneliness first, because also we're a remote working company, right? And one thing is, it's cool to be a remote worker company when it's your decision, right? But when it's forced upon you, it can be a real hell, right? Not being able to see people, not being able to move around and enjoy the perks of remoteness, right? So I'm very worried about people losing their jobs, losing their families, losing their mental stability, losing their future even, right? And the unrest, I mean, you're suffering the unrest firsthand in the US, right? And we're seeing it in other countries rising, right? I'm very worried about that. I'm very worried about the rise of populism. We're seeing in Europe, the rise of the extreme right-wing movements. So I think that's what's coming next. And that's what happens after every big economic crisis. And we saw it in the 40s, and we saw it in other moments of history. So like definitely, I'm much more worried about people than about the economies.
George, do you want to follow that up?
Well, I can only imagine that in a traditional society, like most of European societies are, where you have a patriarchal structure.
Correct.
You're beginning to see these kinds of fissures, these kinds of dislocations. I cannot imagine being a young mother with a newborn baby, for instance, trying to find some kind of support mechanism except the family. So in a sense, we have allowed ourselves through a process of the lower common denominator to hand over our privacy, to hand over our decision-making process. And this is beginning to bite us now, big time.
To add up on that, I think that society hasn't really evolved the way, or like the government regulations, laws, and governments haven't really evolved the way that society has. Like society, like for instance, the concept of family, it's not the same concept we had 100 years ago. 100 years ago, all my family lived in the same household, right? With the grandparents and like with the animals in the barn. But you would have like parents, cousins, aunts, and uncles, everybody living there, like 2 or 3 family structures living under the same roof, right? Nowadays, I'm not a family person, but like I would argue that some of my best friends are more family than my family, right? And I'd like to see that into the to be able to have sort of people like opting in to be part of my family, because I want them to have my benefits. Like I would be, I'd definitely be hands down to keep part of my, like everything that I own if I should pass away, like give it to my friends rather than to my family, right? Mobility, right? We're seeing very fluid societies, like people traveling, like not only digital nomads, but like nowadays, and you guys experience a lot in the US, people just travel all the time. Like they change states all the time, because I was born in here and I studied here. My parents moved twice when I was a kid because they got a job in different states. And then I got a job, a startup in San Francisco. Then I moved into New York to work in venture capital, like something like that, right? And we're seeing this. Traditionally, Europe was less about mobility within countries. But nowadays we do have, because of like the economics, the political and structural changes, now we're seeing that also in Europe, partly thanks to the European Union, right? But even within the countries, it's happening, right? And people even like contracts, like real estate hasn't really evolved, and they think that, we're going to be there living in a house for our entire lifetime. And that doesn't happen anymore. Just maybe more traditional people, maybe people with less possibilities, but we're seeing more and more people just coming to live to Barcelona for like 3 years. Maybe they buy a house and they just sublet it or something. They go away for 5 years, they move somewhere else, and then they just come back, or they just sell the apartment, just buy another one back, because the market just allows that, right? So I'm seeing that some of these old time structures and mental constructions, they're not evolving as fast as we are evolving as a society.
We're also,
sorry, go ahead.
Well, to your point, we're evolving in both directions. Like we have just as many people fleeing the cities to go get that generational household and do that all over again. But then we also have a segment that really does want to only be someplace for 3 months at a time, because
Correct.
Because who knows what's going to be after that 90 days. And there's a lot of and travel tech is booming in a lot of places. George, you said you had.
Yeah, I mean, the on a philosophical level, the debate is to what extent this quote unquote market mobility is real, and to what extent it is just superficial. In other words, when you move from one state to another, and forget the tech bubble, because as you have seen, the tech industry is moving very rapidly away from the hubs, because the hubs have become too ossified, too expensive, too even antisocial in a closed down environment. So the movement, de-urbanization, has accelerated. On the other hand, you have contrarian thinkers who are beginning to go back and buy into these empty apartments in New York now at lower prices. Now, having said that, what does this do to the real person? And the question, I think, is clearly answered by social instability. I think you're absolutely right to talk about the polarization. On top of that, if we talk about 40% unemployment for those under 30 or for those under 40, then you're obviously discrediting the opportunity that many people have. Because when you are 25 years old and you can't find a job, and you don't have a social life, and you live in the basement of your parents, then there is a social issue that is going to be long term, right? I think software as a service is a wonderful opportunity, but how many companies can you keep on delivering? Can you keep on developing? I mean, the ecosystem at some point dries up, which of course begs the question, what is the right policy? Are we seeing policies that are essentially supportive of the have-nots? Because again, you're seeing polarization, economic dislocation, and you're talking about unequal distribution, not only of wealth, but of opportunity. And I think deep down that for us at the startup grind community, this is really what makes it so attractive and so appealing, that we're finding interlocutors who are willing to see that there is no glass ceiling, there is no wall, there is no box.
No,
And we're trying to find the communication system that would allow us to create whatever we are, whether we are in Zurich, whether we're in Barcelona, whether we're in San Francisco, or Nigeria, in Lagos.
It's great. It's a great point. Actually, when, like, and to your point, when there is everywhere in history, nature, when there is a movement in this direction, there's a force going the opposite direction, right? So if we're talking about these people that like they want to have more fluidity in their owning their apartments or moving from state to state, from country to country, there are people that are like it's caused by these subset of people A are causing people B to sort of become more stable outside of the big cities, right? And I've got some friends that they cannot afford rent anymore in Barcelona, and they're like, "Fuck it, I'm just going to a small village and just buy a house there." And you know, work now. Luckily, they can work remotely, right? But then again, if they work remotely, are they really like providing the value to the city they're staying in? Like maybe they are also like, or if they cannot work remotely, when this will go back to normal, they will have to go to the office. They will be polluting more because they will be just using the car just to travel from the village to the city, right? So there's a lot of questions that we're not answering, and I think like politicians nowadays are not offering the right answers to. And mostly, I think that, and also adding up to your point, and circling back to the social mobility thing, it's like because mostly, at least politicians in our state, in our country over here, they have never experienced like a working class situation, right? And they've never had this sort of situations. Therefore, they're thinking with just one part of the brain, and they're not seeing they're thinking about like, oh yeah, everybody will be in control of their finance. Everybody can be an entrepreneur because like everybody can have like their job and then just quit, like get some savings and start their own company. It's like, well, chances are a lot of people, they cannot save money because they have to take care of their families, because they, even though we have universal healthcare here, maybe you cannot afford other things like tuition that you cannot afford, like paying the power or like the water in your household, right? So, or you got to take care of your 4 cousins or 4 siblings, right? And because your parents don't live with you or whatever. I don't know. Like life is too complex, but I think like most of these people, they're just thinking like everybody comes out of business schools and that they have got money in the bank, they've got a network, and they've got people who can help them. Like a lot of people, they do not have neither of this, right? So I'd like to see more diversity. Like, well, diversity and inclusion, it's one big topic, right? Nowadays, but like we are failing to include people from very different backgrounds, right? And that's also one part of the equation, one that we are not talking about openly, right? So it's great. It's great that we have seen this much progress in opening up the community, not only to white straight male, right, in entrepreneurship and VC, but how about we also open it up to people coming from poor or like less advantaged backgrounds, right? Because we're not designing cities for them, we're not devising services or politics or legislations or regulations or even like the workflows and in society for them, right? We're not taking them into account very rarely. Well, only when like maybe for any like kind of chance, like or alignment of the stars, some government decides to do one really popular left-wing policy and pass it, right? And there's like, okay, we have helped this. Now let's go back to helping corporations, right? It's always like that. It's even though I think they work on a power law distribution, I don't think that's fair anymore. Not in the 21st century, not in 2021, not in so-called first world societies.
You're raising quite interesting points, but let's go back to 2 things. One is you talked a little bit about the outlook, your pessimism and the reasons for the fact that the past is not a good predictor of the future. In other words, that we have lived in a bubble, that we had huge monetary stimulus, and there is instability that is either percolating and is not visible yet, or is already beginning to become very visible. What were the main lessons that you learned in 2020?
Well, I learned a lot of things. As a person who travels, I used to travel 40 to 50% of his time. I learned that this is not sustainable. This is not good by any standards, right? Not even for the planet. It's not good for the economy, not good for mental sanity. It's not good for your health. And so we I think that everybody has learned how to live with themselves a little bit better, reconnect with themselves. I I've been the first one to admit that I had never been so much in harmony with myself as I have been in 2020. It's been great to sort of replenish myself after so many years, kind of like, giving. Because one of the things at Startup Grind is like we always give, right? But we very rarely focus on ourselves. And sometimes that's one joke I always tell to Derek, our CEO, right? Because Startup Grind is all about giving and not taking. Sometimes, man, you got to take. It's like, it's kind of like in a plane accident, you got to put the mask first on yourself before helping others. Sometimes, in extreme cases like this one, you got to help yourself first, because otherwise you will not be in a capacity to help others, right? That's what I've learned in 2020. I also learned that you can be in control, and that I think that most people don't know how to live without plans anymore. That's something I had learned prior to the pandemic, because I've sort of always been improvising. I've never been a great planner. But I sort of found out that this has been extremely helpful to me. So the improvising, and a lot of people kind of be like, it's a great contradiction, because I'm a huge control freak, right? But at the same time, I don't like planning. So I like to improvise a lot. I know I will plan for the direction, but I will not plan the steps, right? I know where I want to go. From there on, I just improvise, right? I think those are my takeaways from 2020.
Well, it sounds like what you've been through is making you a better leader of your organization, especially since you have distributed teams with all these same problems.
And that's a really good point, because one of the things that that's something I failed to remember. I open up about a lot of things with my team, right? Our company in March, basically, it's based on 5-6 different core values. One of them being transparency, right? But at a certain point, we knew that people were suffering. We know that people our team is scattered around. Like, we don't have an office, right? We have been a year without seeing each other, because our last meeting was in the Christmas meeting we had in December 2019, right? We had to meet because we meet more like twice per quarter. So we should have met at the end of February 2020, but that's when the lockdown started. I said, well, let's cancel this. So it's been a year and a month since we last met, right, as a company. So we knew that this was going to be hard. So we opened up more. It was 2 steps in the company, right? First, when the harsh lockdown came into effect, then we said, okay, let's just share more than we usually share. Let's be over communicative, so that people feel okay to talk about pretty much everything and anything, right? And even like the founders were like talking about, oh, I'm struggling with this, I'm struggling with that. Just having more calls, like, whereas before we probably had a group chat once per week. Then we decided, let's have 2 per day, right? And like coffee breaks, virtual coffee breaks on Slack and Google Meet, right? So things like that. That was the first phase. And the second phase, and I think that was the most important one, is we open up about feelings, right? We had never talked about that, because most of our company is like, it's just white males. So developers, right? It's sad, but it's like that, right? And traditionally here is like, we're still in this phase where it's not okay if you're a man to talk about your feelings, because it's not manly, right? We don't believe that. But in society, there's still this sort of stigma, right? And one of the first things I shared in June, when after the lockdown, I was getting the imposter syndrome, right? And I thought, like, okay, maybe the company was going really well. Like, in spite of the pandemic, we've grown, but we're not doing well in the personal level, right? And I felt like I was failing them because of that. And I said, like, maybe, dude, like it's on our blog. So if people want to check it, it's on our blog. I think it's called "It's Okay to Be Vulnerable. It's Okay to Be Fragile," something like that. That was an internal Basecamp post I posted, opening up about, maybe I'm not a great leader. I think I'm not doing enough to help you. Like, I reached out, but like, I think I haven't gotten the right answers, or I haven't been able to motivate you to open up, or like, let me know what else can we do. I think I'm not helping you enough, right? I don't think I'm the right leader for this situation. I might have been the best CEO until now, but I might not be the right CEO for now, right? And in turn, everybody, like, well, not everybody, but like quite a lot of people, they say like, no, okay, they open apps like, thank you for talking about this. Now I can share my problems. And they started writing like really long blog posts about their problems internally, right? So I think we have discovered in 2020 that the new leader is fragile, and it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to show it, and you can lead people through these vulnerabilities.
I think that's an incredible lesson to take. I know in March, I wrote in big letters on a couple post notes all over my apartment, which is it was my office. It's just empathy is in, like empathy, like just keep on reminding myself.
Empathy is the word. Yeah, empathy is the word.
For the customer, for your team or whatever. Before we wrap this up, because I know we're running on time here, I want to open it up to either Monica or David if they have any like thoughts from the discussion or a question for Alex.
I don't have questions, but I'd like to thank you. Even though you talk very professionally, you open up humanly to all of us and talk about from experience. As I said, we're planning something on our own and we want to be entrepreneurs and successful. So it's good to know you personally and like this, how that's done and how successful is done.
Thank you for being here.
All right, and David?
No, not really. Just wanted to thank Alex for all that he shared. Alex and I have been friends a long time, and we talk to each other every now and then. It's been a while, but it was nice to hear all that you shared, Alex, and it resonates a lot with what I've experienced and what I've been learning. And I appreciate also the focus on transparency and honesty. I think that's a tremendous lesson in the business world for 2020, and hopefully more and more people adopt that in their business and professional lives.
Well, I think you hit a point there, David, because, and this is on something that Alex brought up earlier, is part of the community that we have is making sure that we have the right people, right? And it's about the right attitude. And that's why those values exist, and that's why when people come, they'll pay to be in a room of people that it feels like one nice big hug, because they understand that there's that empathy there, and also that help is just a simple, vulnerable question away. George, do you have a last question or thoughts?
A couple of things. First of all, it's interesting, Alex, you're echoing what we heard very recently from other startup directors, in particular, the concept of servant leadership. In other words, we in West Michigan, because of the Christian Reformed Church, have been focusing on the idea of servant leadership. And what we noticed is that if you go beyond the religious connotations, in actual fact, you have to be able to serve your team before you can lead the team. And this is a very humbling experience. The second point that many other directors have shared with us is this inward-looking exercise that events and life forced them in the last 12 months to take a step back and ask, okay, I have been doing work for the other, but who is the self? How transformative has this experience been? And at a very practical level, it goes back to servant leadership, which is fascinating that all of us here are building the village that will allow the child to grow. As entrepreneurs, we do have social responsibility, not only in creating jobs, not only in creating wealth, but also passing it on to the next generation. Because we don't feel that wealth is only money. The wealth has to do with family, with faith, with health, with education, with social philanthropic activities, and only very meaninglessly with capital. Thank you for your contribution. It was really powerful today. Thank you.
No, thank you. Just to adapt to what you said here, I didn't know the term serving leadership. I think it's really befitting what we would be talking about. Look, I've always thought that respect is something you earn, that's something you don't buy, right? And most bossy people traditionally are very insecure leaders, that they're just protecting their insecurity through their bossiness, right? And they're just like to shout to people and just like tell them off publicly and things like that, just because they think they own the place, right? And that might have worked in the past, and it did work in the past. it's stupid to do it nowadays, right? The reason I came up with this philosophy, it's because of two explanations. I want to be brief about it because I know we got to wrap this up. One of them is because I've done a lot of volunteering in the past, right? A lot of pro bono volunteering for student associations, and even as a as a freelancer collaborating with a few NGOs and so on and so forth. And I think that that's where you earn the respect. That's by just contributing to causes that you believe in, not imposing your beliefs, right, in them, or just not saying like, I've got this ego and I got to force it onto you, right? It's like, well, I don't know you. Like, why do you come with this ego to me, right? And the second is because luckily as a child, I was brought up between two radically different families that I don't even know how they got together in the first place, right? But one of them happened to marry the other one, right? One of them is super traditionally conservative Christian family where respect had been imposed top down, right? And there were certain totems in the family that were like, they had to be respected. Tradition has to be respected. And you got to do this, you got to do that. You got to have long hair. You got to listen to this, you got to do that. And that really resonates with me because I could contrast it with my other side of the family, which was more like working class. Everybody works, everybody's like in the same level, and no patriarchal situation, because my granddad was always like cooking and cleaning the house, and like my grandmother could just like do other stuff, or like very equitative, very balanced. And so I was looking at both sides of the family, like, why are these behaving like this, or why is this happening here, right? I'm always saying that I'm lucky, like even though it's like not the most stable combination of families, but I was lucky to be able to confront them and just compare them and learn about the differences and sort of project this or isolate this and just take it to other levels like society and work, right? It's like, why these people are like behaving like this and why these people are behaving like that? Why we've got all these models and this different upbringing. So that's why I said, like, this model over here, this model more like equitative, balance, more like working class, more like bottom up, resonates with me much more than the other side, right? And I want to be like them when I create a company. I want to be like them when I raise my children. I want to be like them when I create, all my friendships, when I nurture my relationships in business and everything else. Might create me trouble because I'm too left-wing, I'm too outspoken on social media, but fuck it, it's well worth it, and I can sleep at night. So that's the final message I wanted to give.
I have one last question for you, Alex.
Sure.
The last question we always ask our director friends.
Oh my God. This is the last one, the hard question?
This is the hardest one, yeah. What can the global community of Startup Grind chapter directors do for you?
Sorry, broke up a little bit. So what can the global community of chapter directors do for me?
Yeah, what can we do for you?
Well, that's a good question. Well, first of all, meet me somewhere in 2021. I literally want to see you all in 2021. If I could, I would travel too. I would just take 1 year off and just go and travel all the Startup Grind community all over the world, hopping from city to city, island to island. Or if we can only meet in one place, let's just meet in Greece. It's the best country in the world. Let's just meet, right? More seriously speaking, I think that, what the Startup Grind community should do is make sure that whoever runs the chapter in the city is the best person to do it. Because, and I'm going to be harsh here, like we don't have like the best person in every community. Like when I was regional director, I suffered it. I'm even suffering it right now because sometimes, I help other chapters that are opening up and popping up in cities because I'm not regional director anymore, but I love that. So whenever there's a new chapter coming in, I will go as an attendee, as a speaker, as a sponsor, as whatever, right? I'd like to go. I was in Bilbao for the first event. I just flew there and just to see their first event. It was a really good event. Never had a second event. I helped the chapter in Tenerife to open. They opened the chapter. They never created an event. Like I introduced them to people. I introduced them to speakers. Like I introduced them to sponsors. Never opened an event. Same in Malaga. If you're not going to do this, just if you're not 100%, 200%, 1,000% convinced that you're going to pull this and do at least 10 events with us, just please don't do it because you're damaging the brand, right? I know it sounds harsh, it sounds arrogant, but Startup Grind lives because of the reputation, right? And that's the best thing we can do. If we want to be truly a powerful brand, what we got to do here is make sure that everybody running the chapter is the best person in the ecosystem and that's entirely prepared to do so, right? If not, just feel free to open up and just pass it to somebody else. Don't leave chapters in zombie state. There are a lot of people just owning the brand because they've done like 1 year startup brand and then they don't organize events anymore. Just don't do it. There will be somebody in your team who can take over temporarily, permanently as a new chapter director, right? Or reach out to somebody else, reach out to the community, reach out to me if you want to speak about it, about taking some time off or how to pass it down to somebody else. I can do it. Like, that's the reason why I closed my chapter in Andorra. We knew that we were not the right people to run it. And right now there's somebody else, right? So at least I'm practicing what I preach. So, try it. But if it doesn't work for you, it has to work for somebody else. There's always somebody who would be prepared at the same level, or even a better level than you are. So just don't damage the brand of StartPrint, because it's the only thing that we've got in StartPrint is it's suffering right now, and we gotta overcome this, and we'll overcome this if we come together, right? But we'll do so by providing value on a stellar scale in 2020.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's the other thing that I wrote down on a post-it note is mediocrity is out. Like, there's no room for mediocre anymore.
Yeah. A couple of times in this 7 years I've been doing StartPrint, I thought of just quitting. But then I see, like, I don't think there's somebody else like prepared to take it to the next level in Barcelona. And there will be somebody. But right now I'm extremely motivated to run my chapter. Still, it's 7 years. Like, technically in a marriage, in 7 years of marriage, you're not in love anymore, right? So I'm still in love with StartPrint in Barcelona, right? So the moment where this love is gone or the flame is dying out, I will make sure I will find out who the next person is to run StartPrint Barcelona, and he or she will have to do it my level or better, because otherwise I will not rest until this person makes a better job than I have done.
Great. Spoken like a true father. So thank you so much for being so generous and joining us today, letting us go over a little bit. Really appreciate making your acquaintance. Look forward to being in Barcelona with Yorgo here, and maybe David will join us, and Monica as well.
He will.
Share a drink and meal.
David, he will. Yeah, I know. I know that.
He will.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you, guys. Alex and David, can you stay up just for a moment? When you
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you, guys. Have a nice day. Bye.
Nice to meet you, Monica. Bye-bye.